Welcome. This is Messy Conversations. It's a space produced by undergraduate studies here at Antioch University. And on behalf of the Messy Conversations team, planning team, welcome to our third session of the summer season, Hybridia, Embracing Ambiguity. Just before introductions, I want to share some announcements. We are a volunteer-based team. Welcome volunteers if people would like to join, help somehow. There are lots of things to participate before the scenes, behind the scenes, but it's a wonderful project, so people are welcome to volunteer for it. I'm not sure we have a session for next week. Did we have a session for next week? We are not, so this is the last session of the season. And we're gonna regroup for the fall quarter. And the sessions for the fall quarter are gonna be announced soon. So you will be able to know what is coming, interesting stuff for the fall quarter. And I just want to remind you of the format of the session for those that haven't been here before. We spend normally the first half hour in conversation with our guests, and afterwards we open the space for the audience to jump in and ask questions or participate in the discussion. Just feel free to post in the meantime. Post your ideas in the chat as you feel that they come out, so that we can get back to them later. And we want to get started with a question. Can you pull out the poll? We have a tiny poll that just a question, simple question for people to situated with the topic. I can see.
Sorry for the delay. It is hiding now.
Or actually, we're a small group. We can ask the people to raise their hand, right? Guys, do you agree that ambivalence is something that can be really embraced? Okay, well, you have the poll now. Thank you. Oh, I cannot, because I'm participating, I cannot vote, but I would vote later verbally. Okay. So there's an 80% of people that would agree. Okay, in the poll. Thank you, guys. Share results. Stop sharing. So there's a majority thinking that embracing ambiguity is possible. And there are some responses that are going to come to chat that cannot be in the poll. Thank you so much for bringing that up. So it depends on the person and situation. Okay, it's like a relative term. Thank you for sharing that as well. So there's an inclination towards understanding what it is or embracing what it is and being like aware that this doesn't apply to anything. Thank you so much for that reminder. So today we are honored to have with us the founders and producers of the podcast Hybridia. And Hybridia has been around for more than a year. Here is the link to the podcast space, and the founders and producers are Kirby Chen Makes, visual artist, writer, performer, and teacher based in Los Angeles, and I would say alum from Antioch University. And we have Saki Sato, artist and performer, living and working in New York City, and has been all over the world, according to what I noticed in the bio. I was very jealous. So both are engaged in multidisciplinary, and they have their own artistic pursuits. They are very committed to the idea of redefining identities and understanding how that works, and we will hear more about that from them. They have their own professional, personal websites. Here they are in the chat, and their bios and details of their of the session are going to be found in this other link. So now you have been gifted with multiple links to enjoy yourselves, but not during the session. Okay, not during the session because we have more interesting things at the moment. The podcast, guys, welcome, Saki and Kirby.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So honored to have you here with this such a creative experience that you have been practicing. So the what I read in your website of your podcast is that your mission somehow like in a time of widespread binary and polarized thinking, Hybridia is a podcast for more nuanced conversations between those who find themselves at the intersections of multiple cultures and identities.
Yeah.
Yeah, right.
It's
So how this
actually-
happened? How this happened? Why? How you ended up with that mission? And you can walk us a little bit through the life cycle of the podcast, the background, because I want to get out of the way, guys, because your voice is more important than mine in this context. So it's like the life cycle, like the background, decisions that come together. Where is it now? Where is it going? So you
Yeah.
can just tell us a little bit about that.
Do you remember how it started, Kirby?
Well, I remember it was a few years ago.
I think it was almost 4.
Yeah, during COVID lockdown still. And Saki and I have a mutual friend who had suggested that we talk to each other during the
I think
Atlanta spa.
we're both like talking to that friend about how upset we were about
Yeah.
or confused we were about the Atlanta spa shootings, and they're like, maybe you should talk to each other.
Yeah. And then we started talking on the phone, and then I confessed to Saki that I had, for some reason, always had this fantasy of doing a podcast with her. And
Yeah, and that was like pretty random to me, but cool. But I was also really getting in to help process like the, you know, Asian hate stuff, but also feeling not really that Asian at the time. Like I was listening to a lot of podcasts with Asian hosts, like Asian Not Asian and Feeling Asian to help process. So it was kind of like at the perfect time when I was getting really into podcasts. So I thought, oh, like I never thought of that, but sure, we should try it.
yeah, and then I also was remembering recently that Saki really early on was the one who had the suggestion that we um, really like consider expanding the definition or who we wanted to invite as guests on the podcast, because at first I had been thinking that it was going to be like primarily just focusing on like Asian American identity, and then it opened up so many doors to think about it in all of these different ways, and we had like so many incredible brainstorming sessions as we were developing it and defining what we wanted it to be.
Yeah, I think yeah, maybe listening to these like Asian exclusive podcasts, it kind of felt like, well, there's already people doing that and they're doing it well.
Yeah.
But we're coming from a kind of different mode of feeling not this or that, which those podcasts also talked about that, but it was cool to think about expanding it to people who might not even be from mixed heritage, but like just mixed life experiences, like growing up one place but being raised under another culture, just like any kind of cognitive dissonance between yeah, like traditions, cultures, ways like your identity, which yeah, is pretty expansive now that we have started opening it up. Yeah. But yeah, then we started pretty slowly. I think we had some ideas of some friends that we already knew. We'd want to interview, and we kind of started with more close friends. And our conversations definitely evolved. Like I think it starts out kind of like, oh, we don't really know if we're like enough Japanese or Chinese, like, like our other side that's like not white. Growing up in America, we were feeling like kind of disconnected from the culture of our other parent. But after talking about it, it's kind of like, oh, we're all in the same boat, and maybe it would never be enough in any situation. So just be happy with where you're at. Uh, do you remember any other early feelings, Kirby?
Definitely like shyness around doing a podcast, and I feel like we talk about that a lot, just how we've gotten more confident during the interviews and reaching out to people we don't know. And it's just been it sort of just like has snowballed into, we'll interview one person and they suggest some other people. And so it feels like we're also just getting to meet a lot of really exciting people through this project. And yeah, I don't know. We're doing it very DIY, and we did a crowdfunder at some point. So we had some funds to get some editors and things like that. And now we're back to just doing it ourselves. And I feel like we're excited for this next season that's about to come out in September or thereabouts. We've been starting to interview some more people. And
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it was a real process because I said like we started talking maybe 4 years ago, but then we stalled for a while. Like we had recorded several conversations, I think, over a couple of years, but we're having, yeah, like shyness, or it was feeling very vulnerable. We didn't maybe say it, but we were also like supposed to be editing the episodes, but the editing would never happen because I think there was also like a mental block about like it was the first episode is just us telling our stories, and it was like, okay, I'm gonna edit this, and then like months would pass and never edited. And so I think we realized like, oh, like we're having a block, and so that's when we decided to do the crowdfunding so we could hire people and pay them to edit, and that really helped. And then also like tell people we were doing this, so like, you know do like soft launch, letting people know that this was happening and putting it out in the world at the same time as raising money. That was helpful because I think it was like for a couple years maybe we're kind of like we're doing the podcast, but then we would be like kind of shy or sheepish about telling people we were doing the podcast because we hadn't released anything and it was in this weird cycle. So then when we finally like committed and to raising money, like I think that was really helpful to like put it out there. And even though it was vulnerable, we just did it, and also asked for money, which is also vulnerable. So I think it worked out in the end to let people know about it.
definitely.
15 episodes so far.
Yeah.
And that is easier said than done, right? Especially the circumstances that you are describing of vulnerability. I would like to go back to something that came up when we were talking about preparing for this session, that we didn't do that much preparation. It was more like, touch base. And this idea of the types of issues are so intimately connected to people's lives and to people's experiences. And the people that discover sometimes in the middle of the conversation is when they discover things that they probably didn't thought before. So I had described that as a kind of worms, opening another kind of worms and another kind of worms, and how this vulnerability can become so explosive in the context of this because of the personal, deeply personal, intimate issues. So that aspect, what are the lessons learned around that aspect? Because you have mentioned the notion of vulnerability more than once.
Yeah. Well, I think that first episode was real, like that gave us a taste of, we told our own stories, it was just us two, like talking to each other. And that was the hardest episode to release. I like had a mental block about telling my parents I was doing the podcast. Like for a long time, couldn't even tell them I was going to talk about my history. And then, we went through a period of like, how much do I want to say? Or I kind of wanted to check with them first if they'd be comfortable with certain things, maybe took out one or two things. So we went through our own process of how that feels and how um, insane it can make you feel. So I think with our guests, we try to be really have like a safe space and like do pre-interview, kind of see where naturally they'd just be talking about stuff where we wouldn't have to like push into any areas that they wouldn't naturally just want to talk about. Um, and I think that's really helped us. Like it just really depends on what people are comfortable with, and that's where like how we guide the conversation. So sometimes it's more about people's work because they're often like creatives. So we might just talk about their work and through their work talk about hybridity, or we usually get like a little bit of background, at least like where they grew up and what maybe culture they're from. But then if it's not really what they want to talk about, we can talk about what they do instead. And that still becomes like a hybrid conversation. What do you think, Kirby?
Yeah, I mean, the pre-interview I feel like is always um, a good place to touch base with our guests and find out um, even just what they think about the word hybrid or hybridity, and get to have a conversation that then we use as like a launching point in the actual episode. But then I feel like the episodes themselves go in very unexpected directions always. But
Yeah, even with the pre-interview, we try not to like make it static. And so yeah, sometimes we're just like lost in a flow sometimes. And it's just like you have to trust it's gonna go somewhere cool. And it usually does.
yeah, and one thing with Hybridia is it's sort of this imagined space for us, and so we like to ask the guests afterwards where they feel like they just went. Um, so we kind of developed this liminal space of different locations or feelings, atmospheres that we can travel to with the guests, and it just keeps building.
Yeah, and that usually becomes the episode title. We ask them where in Hybridia do they think they went? If Hybridia is like this imaginary space. Um, yeah.
Sometimes
I,
it's like more abstract, like
yeah, that's
the
true.
place of permission, or then other times it's very like a physical cave or a grotto or
Hmm.
on a flying boat or something.
Right.
Mhm. How often do you see this situation when once people are situated in this groove that you bring up in your podcast of the hybrid, the notion of hybridity, that is just not simply the coexistence of opposites or disparity or this, but because of that, there's the emergence of something entirely new and unexpected. So it's by combining or coexisting elements that don't have anything to do with each other, something can happen. And that to what extent that somehow, because I listen to some of the podcasts and I almost dare to think that that emerges in one way or another all the time. And I wanted to know, how do you live that experience?
Hmm. I don't know if this is exactly what you're talking about, but I'm kind of remembering maybe everyone to a certain degree could agree with this, but when we talked to our friend Catalina, who's a filmmaker who's Colombian American, and she talked about her and her brother visiting Colombia and like being outsiders, but also being fluent and able to understand what's going on, but like being able to observe as well, because they didn't grow up there, but then they have like this access with the language. They're kind of like like moving through the space as others, but like have enough language accents to get really deep into some communities. And I thought that it's really interesting because if you're coming from an outsider perspective, you'll see things so differently or receive them differently, which I think is a lot of people. Um, like you might feel outside of the culture, but it allows you to see things really differently um, than someone who just grew up there their whole life.
Yeah, and I feel like it affects the day to day for just like I mean, I think it was always there subconsciously, but now that we have this sort of container for these ideas, it's um, just interesting to kind of be out and about in the world and um, become really hyper aware of like how many thresholds there are or interstices and all these
Hmm.
ways in which we are all kind of like engaging in different types of in-betweenness.
Yeah, I guess that conversation, that poll from the beginning about embracing ambiguity, it's like I could see situations where, yes, you have to be clear, but also I think it is our way of living that we always had to embrace that we were not totally one thing or the other and not. And so like I think at least for me, I don't know if it's relativist, but I have a pretty open mind about things because I know like I've tried to define things and can't really pin them down for my own life. So I kind of leaves me pretty open to letting things be a little bit more squirmy with their definitions in real life, I think, because that's just how it
So,
feels. Yeah. Like,
Mhm.
yeah, or like things evolving and changing rather than being so set.
Mhm. Mhm.
Yeah, like, or even like our ideas like of belonging, like definitely just evolved throughout more and more conversations.
yeah, that's definitely been a huge kind of unexpected part of doing this podcast that Saki and I have talked about a bit before. Just um, yeah, feeling more comfortable in how we relate to certain parts of our identities and cultures and um, a little bit less of the feeling of being like lesser than or
Mhm.
inadequate or just yeah being where we are with things and
Yeah, because we've been gotten have such good conversations with some people, like people who were adopted and like had to connect to their culture completely without any parent, because both of their adoptive parents were not of the culture they were raised with, like Bonnie.
Mhm.
And then, your friend Kat, who like has a kind of unknown lineage on one side. So it's like that's just going to be unknown. And it could, who knows what it is? Like you could guess, but also you could make peace with it and just kind of be who you are without having to pin. Maybe you'll never have an answer about like what you are technically.
Yeah.
Um, so it's been really interesting to talk to people with like different but similar feelings that they've grown up with.
Mhm. I get from what I listen in the podcast that I was able to listen and from conversation with you that there's this relationship with the notion of hybridity, as you just described, Saki, is open in principle, see how it goes, right?
Mhm.
But alert at the same time that there might be boundaries at some point in certain contexts. So, and that combination makes the confidence that, in my understanding, is the confidence that you have been building. So to know where the boundaries are at the same time, remain entirely open.
Mm-hmm.
Otherwise, the experience wouldn't be possible.
Right. Do you mean like about our guests, like asking about their backgrounds and stuff?
Yeah, and you yourselves at the founders and hosts is like is being open to whatever you're opening up in your space.
Yeah, I think, yeah, I don't know if we ever like, I mean, sometimes people clearly before tell us like they might not want to talk about certain things, but usually I think it's more like a feeling and maybe we more open it up to people to share what they want to share. I'm trying to think about how it works and it's more like we won't ask them a question that only has one answer that they have to like say like what's your relationship with your father or something, like they'll just ask them to like just give us your background and they'll just talk about what they want to talk about and we can talk about anything from there, but we don't need to push into like juicy or salacious things that you know could make someone uncomfortable. But it all depends. I mean, we also have had like in an interview that we ended up not releasing because someone just wasn't comfortable. And, you know, it just happens sometimes. Like people don't really know until they start talking about it. And I think it was going well, but like mid conversation, we were kind of like, oh, I wonder if they're okay. And then after,
Yeah.
it was like, it's totally fine if they don't want to. It's really personal stuff. So it never has to be out in the public if you don't want it there.
Yeah,
So
and
I,
we
yes,
send the episodes to our guests before we release them so that
Usually, yes, maybe not always we did. It kind of depended on the person, maybe.
that's true. Towards the end, we were not
Yeah.
actually.
I think we were doing it because we had so much time had elapsed between the early episodes and the
Right.
release. We sent them to the people to be like, hey, is this still okay to release? Because a lot has changed between.
Yes.
But then when it was more happening more in real time, people could remember what we said basically, and they're like, yeah, that's fine. And if they wanted to, we could let them hear it. But usually, I think
Just went out.
yeah.
Mhm. Oh, well, I noticed that there's a very interesting question here in the chat that we can just transition little by little into the opening to the audience.
Yeah.
Sure.
Asa, would you like to represent your question, please?
Yeah, sure. Thanks so much, Saki and Kirby. Great to hear from you. My question in the chat, I was around the use of the term hybrid, specifically as opposed to other terms that have come up like mixed or biracial or multicultural, multilingual, all of those terms. And I'm wondering specifically if you see a difference between a term like hybrid and mixed. And if so, what is that difference, or what drew you to the term hybrid itself?
Mm.
I think when Saki and I first started talking, we realized that we kind of used different terms to think of ourselves, and we had conversations about how even those felt somewhat not all inadequate somehow. There
Like
was
saying you're half something, half
half.
this.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I'd never liked saying half because it feels like there's a lack. It implies an inherent lack of something. And um, mixed feels like we were talking about this with our friend Morgan, that also comes from like a very academic place. And um, yeah, I don't remember exactly how we did a lot of
Yeah,
wordplay.
I think we both like sci-fi too,
Yeah, that's
like,
what I was thinking too.
hybrid. Like not I don't know if in a conversation I would ever say like I am a hybrid, but like in my mind I'm thinking like, yeah, I'm like a hybrid being, but I don't like represent myself like maybe yeah, sometimes I maybe even say mixed or half. But yeah, like when we were thinking about the actual name, what excited us was like this more imaginary or exciting term than something that felt linked to like a lack or like a taint or a yeah, something more at least imaginative to us, I think.
Yeah, yeah. It feels very open-ended and fluid and um,
Yeah. And the Hybridia, it's like, like evoking like a kind of fantasy kingdom idea. And initially, like I had one, I'm like, oh, I'm gonna draw a map, and every episode there's gonna be a location on the map where we went, but that never happened. But we do it in speaking, like Kirby was saying. So we have like a map in our heads.
yeah. There's always these grand visionings for the future where we're like, well, we'll have an installation and we'll
Yeah.
create a 3D experience or
Oh,
a video game.
yeah. I did remember one other term. Who was the multi hyphenate people? That was also another.
Oh, that was Audre Lorde. Yeah,
Yeah,
multi-hyphenate felt a
yeah.
little more akin to how we were speaking about things. When there's a video of her in Germany and she's addressing Black women in Germany as multi-hyphenates, and they have like a whole conference around this idea.
Yeah, but maybe more. I'm thinking about how we're describing ourselves, and we just say like I'm Japanese and white. Well, it's just like this and instead of like half this, half that. Like maybe that's how our minds have shifted a little bit. Just say like
Mhm.
the things we are instead of saying like I'm lacking. Yeah, but thanks for that question. We
Yeah,
definitely thought a lot about it throughout and still thinking about it. Like still it's always changing like how you want to describe yourself because like we said,
yeah.
even as we were talking through our different interviews, our ideas were changing.
And the word hybrid has entered discourse in such different ways too within the time of us using it, like, hybrid work situations or
Mhm.
um, things like that.
Yeah.
Yeah, it strikes me that I love how it feels a bit more additive or like open to newness than like mixed or yeah, those other
Mm-hmm.
terms like you described, like thinking of it in other contexts. Like it's often uh, hybrid elements are something new or innovative or kind
Mm-hmm.
of
Mm-hmm.
like additive of its parts rather than just like equal to the two halves or something.
Totally. Yeah. And mixed, I don't know if you think about like color theory, like there's primary colors and then you like mix them to make the others. So it's like the primaries are the best, or they're not the purest, and then mixed has like the idea that it's like muddied somehow. So a hybrid is just like it's the thing. It's not like saying whatever about how pure or not or something like that. Yeah. Not that mixed colors are bad, but yeah, I think that there's so many connotations about everything. So using something that is a little less common was also helpful, I think.
Brad is agreeing with you in that the incompleteness of the other words, right, Brad?
And the other words imply something isn't done or whole or something along those lines.
Yeah. Yeah, and like even in Japan, like the way they'll use the English word hafu to like describe people who are Japanese and something Japanese and it's like the implication is always like Japanese is like the whole, but these people are halves. So,
That's a very interesting reference to the whole and the parts, right? Which
mhm.
is a typical way to otherize peoples or situations or minimize or erase.
Mhm.
That this is not the real thing. Did I neglect anyone that was raising their hand? No. 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 Okay. Sorry. Having eyes in different screens. Oh yeah. But that's very that's you apply the same concept to the other situations as you were describing, Kirby. That is this is a situation rather than a culture or a people or this is not what's supposed to be is combined. You can think about architecture, you can think about politics, you can think about institutions, you can think about any context where clear, sharp divisions of this or that are enforced. And with those, when those binaries are enforced, and there's no room for hybridity in certain contexts, it's where you see the value of spaces like the one that you are creating, because you are planting the seed that the binary is not gonna go very far away with that kind of like a division of this or that. So it's an interesting thing that you are introducing.
Yeah, I think, and also like we've thought like we launched our crowdfunding campaign like the day after Trump got reelected, I think. So it was really depressing, but also we're like, should we even like launch this? But then we thought like, well, now is the time to have these conversations, and like it's become even more apparent like as even like we're kind of looking at different funding grants, and like their National Endowment of the Arts had something come up, and then we're like looking at their guidelines, and I think literally we couldn't even apply because they wouldn't support these kind of conversations anymore. So it's feels really important to just try and do them on our own, because infrastructure like federally or whatever is really suppressing this kind of thought. So it feels good to keep things open and fluid and able to have this type of ambiguous conversations.
Because conversation.
Yeah, the sibling to messy conversations.
It's a sibling, yeah. It's a sibling with conversations, yes. I know that you are planning for the fall quarter. I don't see other comments here, but welcome comments, guys. So don't let me monopolize anything. The you have a fall plan for the new season, and in which ways this is a next step, how it shows how you are like some tapping on the experience, what is different, and where do you think that is heading in terms of the concept or the possibilities?
Well, one thing we always talk about is that, so much of this has existed online or in the virtual. Sometimes Saki will have a guest at her home, or I'll have someone at my place, but for the most part, it's been very much through screens. And so we always talk about wanting to have some sort of, what did we say the other day, in the flesh?
Hybridia in the flesh,
in the
yeah.
flesh event.
Sounds very Cronenberg.
Yeah. So that's definitely something we still hope for in the future, just maybe to have like a panel with
Yeah.
some of our previous guests, and some sort of like social community event for folks to just get to be in a physical space together and continue these conversations.
Yeah. Yeah, that'd be great. Maybe we should the last episode of our second season was Tracy Kato Kiriyama, and I felt like that was like kind of a climax of us just like reaching out randomly to someone we didn't even know, which is like a big deal for her. We're like, oh my God, like maybe I don't know if they'll say yes, and they said yes, and it was really a great conversation, and they let us know about what's that like open mic kind of
The
thing?
Tuesday night.
Yeah, it would be so fun if we could like go there and do a little episode, or I don't know how, I don't want to monopolize their open mic, but anyway, it's just cool to have made connections like that and see people doing cool events like that. I feel like we could find some way to do it, like things are already happening like that. So
Yeah, I think that's possible. Or even just getting to do something like this. We hope to share this messy conversation as some portion of an episode, or do something with it where we can share it with other listeners. And yeah, it's just making me think that maybe we could do more like these larger group discussions as an episode, instead of just like three people talking. Or
yeah, and there is if we're talking about kind of wild ideas we've had, like there was one episode idea that I wanted to do because we always end up talking about food and culture, and there could be one like somehow called the banquet, and we like have mics on like a Lazy Susan in a Chinese restaurant or something, and like somehow have a conversation around a restaurant table. Is technically a little challenging, but I always think that would be cool.
I think we can make it happen.
Yeah, we can make it happen, and I guess there'd have to be a video because I don't think it translates to audio that you're like rolling a Lazy Susan around. Like I think it'd be cool to see like the I definitely think there's been movie scenes about people passing like a joint around a table that have done this shot. So we could just do it with a in a
Yeah, we
Chinese
could
restaurant.
rig a camera to
Yeah.
have the round table.
Yeah, when we finally become a video podcast like everyone's doing, that could be our intro. Because right now we're audio only. Like that's another thing that like maybe helps the guests. We're like, we're not going to use the video. Don't worry about it. Don't worry if you look crazy.
Mhm. Sure.
But eventually maybe.
Oh,
Yeah,
that
yeah.
70s show.
The
Yes.
comment is exactly what I was thinking about. That 70s show passing around a joint. That's
Yeah.
the shot that was in my head. Yeah. We should rewatch that and ask them how they did it. Yeah.
Yeah, there's an element here of modeling yourselves, a way to, honor your beliefs and your values and put them out there in the world to see how others join and interact with those. And then you're doing that pretty bravely, guys. It's a great role model for other peoples. And I cannot stop thinking about how the lockdown somehow was a trigger here. I keep going back about the lessons of the pandemic.
Mm.
And this is one of the examples of what happens when everything closes, everything it seems gone, and suddenly something pops up out of that situation that is modeling the hybrid, the birth of the hybrid.
Yeah. Yeah. I think the pause, like, at least for me, I felt like I was going, going, going. I'm the kind of person that I keep busy. I enjoy
He's a
it.
New Yorker.
Yeah, just I keep going, keep stacking things on, but not stopping to think sometimes and address things. Um, so that was really important to have that kind of void to be like, I have these feelings I have to deal with now. And even before I started talking with Kirby, I think when like the George Floyd murder happened and all the protests were happening earlier, our first guest, like I started talking, like I just like in a Google Doc was like chatting with our first guest, Morgan, because I asked him if he wanted to talk because I was just feeling it was the same kind of feelings like that I ended up talking about with Kirby, but Morgan is also Vietnamese American. And I was, yeah, just feeling all these emotions. And I said, do you want to talk? And he suggested, how about we like write in a Google Doc, which was really interesting. Like it was like a baby step because like talking on the phone maybe felt too real. So we were just like typing and taking turns typing in a Google Doc, which it was really therapeutic. And also like that's like another kind of safe space. Like that was one step. And then eventually we did interview him and we had like a full conversation. But I loved thinking that we had to start in this like super safe space of like typing separately remotely on a Google Doc. So we've come a long way. I think, did someone raise their hand before?
Oh, it was me. I was just gonna say I appreciated the whole editing thing. We had talked about taking messy conversations and making it onto a podcast. And then I looked at the whole editing part and I was like immediately ran away and shut down. And then also like, what do you think using a Google Doc, like how would you compare like that creating safe space versus being in a conversation, or how would you compare those two formats?
I think in this instance, like my friend is like a writer, so that's like a safe space for a writer to like be able to process, write. I mean, I could see the writing in real time, but it was also like kind of removed from like, voice can show emotion, if you kind of start to choke up about something personal, which can be hard. I mean, I get uncomfortable. I can kind of cry easily. I don't think I've ever done it on the podcast, but like in talking with people, I can cry easily and I get really uncomfortable to do that And so I don't want to do that. So it creates an extra barrier sometimes with the voice. So yeah, starting with a Google Doc with something really complicated, especially that I hadn't processed, was like, I think, an interesting way to do it.
We do that with our interviews too. We have like an outline that we share with our guest, and we encourage them to like add things. And sometimes a guest will add something that maybe we didn't talk about on the phone during the pre-interview, but maybe it felt too vulnerable at the time, and they'll say something I actually have really been wanting to talk about is this, or so yeah, it is interesting to have that the the
Like the
pre-document.
text-based
Yeah, the
thing.
text before the verbal.
I think at least for me, it's grounding to have like the kind of outline to look at because sometimes I do feel like we're kind of like free floating in the conversation. And at least as a host, sometimes I'm like, I don't know where we're going. Like sometimes like mentally I'm like, ooh, like not sure what we're gonna talk about next. Like just like listening to someone, but also like processing that we'll have to guide the conversation somewhere. And sometimes you have no idea, but then sometimes maybe they're talking and you click on something that, oh, this is like the path. Like you're trying to find your way through the woods, kind of. That's what it feels like. You're like, and sometimes you like hit a tree, you're like, oh shit. But also I think like if we talk about text, like sometimes I don't know, we've done it lately, but besides people's work, sometimes we ask people to bring an essay or a short reading. That has been really fun. Like they will all read like a short piece that could be accessible for someone listening to like read kind of quickly. And yeah, that's nice to kind of talk about together.
Yeah, and we always in our show notes we share the texts and things that we've referenced so that if listeners are curious, they can access that information pretty readily. And
yeah, it's been cool stuff like Kimberly Lydia's My Native Language is Noise, like talking about not understanding the Filipino language, but like just hearing the cadence of it and like kind of wanting to like leave it at that state of not understanding, and that like spurred a lot of cool discussion with our friend Morgan. And there's been others, yeah. Maybe lately we've more stuck to reading or viewing people's work, like of the guest, like the guest's own work, and then that's spurring the conversation. So yeah, it's always good to have like anchors to go back to when you're like not drowning, but just like paddling. You're like,
I'm drowning, but not really drowning. Like that.
yeah, it's like pleasurable to like not know where you are sometimes, but then yeah, and I feel like sometimes like when we're like starting the podcast, and then I think I remember one. I think I've gotten less worried about it because we add intros, but we started one with like a close friend like Bella, who we both Kirby knows really well. I know pretty well, so we like moved in hot, and I was like thinking like mid conversation, like, oh my god, we like never even introduced like like anything about this person. But then we ended up adding it in the intro, so like there's also like a lot of things we can do afterwards.
I keep thinking about this, the commonality between your guests and is this creative community. And no wonder the way to create safe spaces in this community in the most immediate ways or vehicles could be something creative, whatever it is. This case was writing, right? But just for a moment, and I'm consider this remarkable thing that you're saying or doing, what is something that is behind this. That is, you think about human communication that started really with primal gesture, or that kind of stuff, like a 100 hundreds of thousands of years ago. And then writing came way later. So you find that is starting with the sophistication of writing as the vehicle to create a safe space, as opposed to the older directive of being,
Right.
human.
Like the primal stuff is like more
Exactly.
directly tied to your emotions, and sometimes intellectualizing it a little bit, like talking about people's work, helps at least me for sure feel safe.
Process.
Yeah. Because it has like a removal, like once removed from your own direct body and experience sometimes.
Yeah, I think also not like in contrast to that, but maybe in addition, the podcast format versus just having like a written out interview. What I do like about the oral aspect is oral AURAL, but then also ORAL. Just I think it was easier for me when we were starting this project to say that we were doing an oral history project rather than a podcast, because podcast sometimes has these certain connotations maybe of its format or its style. And I think that we do get to have the pre-interview and the outline. That written element really grounds us and the guest oftentimes, but then to get to have the documentation, the oral documentation, feels really important somehow in relation to this hybridity project.
Yeah, and I think we don't have to, with writing that would be published, I feel like people would be a lot more precious about how things are said.
Yeah.
And we can be very casual, and it doesn't have to be perfect how things come out, and we're like thinking things out in real time, and maybe we'll change our minds later. But it was, it's not in stone. There can be an AI transcription, but we don't usually have like it written out. Yeah. Yeah, it feels like almost safer that someone would have to slog through like 40 minutes of an episode to get to our thoughts rather than just scan it, reading it really quickly. Like you have to invest some time.
Yes, too. A wish list, guys, that you might have.
Yeah. Oh, I thought I saw someone else raise their hand.
Oh, sorry, I didn't. I'm blind today.
I had my hand up. I've been thinking about what you said of wanting to edit and then not going back, like it just sitting there and sitting there. And I loved that because I think I could relate to a lot of projects that have an emotional component to them. It's like I want them to stay the way they were. Like most integrity to the actual situation, and then edits become like a reconfiguring or like something gets lost. And I also know the perfectionist part of me that I feel is the supremacy part of me. It has to be talked to, like stop that.
Yeah.
And so I'm just, this has been a really interesting conversation to think about the ways that we hold on to an experience that really it's got to be very emotional, especially if you don't know what someone's going to say when you have people who maybe aren't as close to you both to talk to. And I love this work and the name of it. That's just great. Yeah.
Thanks. Honestly, for me though, like the people who are closest to me, that was the hardest for me to think about telling them. And like I almost don't care about the strangers, but like telling my parents, it took me like a couple years to be like, I'm doing a podcast about my background. I might talk about you. And the edit thing is funny because I think I was literally removing every like and it was like it was becoming a many hours editing project that then I just let sit, and we just had to rip the band-aid off. And also like listening to our own voices, like Kirby, I think you tried editing, and at first
I couldn't do it.
You couldn't edit your own voice, but I feel like now that we've become more comfortable, I feel like
Yeah,
Yeah.
now we with each episode I feel we're learning to let go more and more of the perfectionist monster.
Yeah, it feels now that they're out there, it feels so much easier. But like before it was released, like having it be like, this is the first episode, the idea that it had to be perfect was really heavy. So it was so good to just hire someone
Yeah.
who was a professional to just take care of us to do that. We needed that so badly.
Mhm. Editors are uh, hybrid. I'm trying to think of the ways in which they're Hybridians.
Yeah, I'm sure there are ways of
Yeah.
putting their brain in multiple places, the viewer, the creator.
One of my first experiences in research was transcribing interviews for
Oh,
people working on their doctoral dissertations. And my field is psychology, and we know we don't take the ums and the ahs and all of that out because it conveys
yeah.
emotion that's important to the coding. Uh,
Yeah.
so I think that's probably like as soon as you said that, I was like, oh, that's another part of the reason. It's not just perfectionism. It's like including the emotion is so
Mm,
important to expressing and conveying your ideas.
yeah. Or it's like the vulnerability of, oh, when I speak, I use a lot of filler. Like, you know, and I don't even notice it as much now. It's just it is what it is. Um, so we can just be like less self-conscious about it now.
Yeah, I think I've come to appreciate, I mean, I've always liked silence for different reasons as a poet or something, but um when there's quote unquote dead air, which is like the radio nightmare or something, I kind of just like relishing in it because it means that we're all thinking and
Mm.
there's nothing wrong with that. So,
It almost makes the listener like snap to attention. Like, oh, what
yeah,
happened?
and maybe the listener gets to get lost in thought for a moment too, you know.
Mhm.
I think that's called a pregnant pause.
Oh,
Yeah.
yes, that's what we're doing.
Yes.
Yeah, and
Yes.
also maybe it's like imposter syndrome too, because we hadn't released it yet, and we're thinking like, oh, are we really hosts? Do
Yeah.
real hosts have this much filler, or so now it's just like we have 15 episodes, so whatever it is, what it is. We feel like more experienced, so
Mhm.
it feels better.
Mhm.
I think also like when people can tolerate silence between each other, there's some intimacy that's building or has been built,
Yeah.
and
Totally.
that feels really important what you're doing. Yeah.
Mhm.
I think you're good at it, Kirby. Sometimes I think I jump to fill the silence.
Oh, no, we need someone to jump
We're a good
in.
balance. We're a good
Yeah,
balance.
yeah.
But I always respect someone comfortable with silence.
Mm.
Someone said, "Love me a good agenda." Yeah, the outline.
Oh, yeah.
That was me, but
Yeah.
also that's also like my ADHD brain. I'm like, I need something to ground me and keep me on track. And I
Mhm.
think Sarah Beth might have touched on this, but like another thing that's like I'm really learning is like how just to really be present and with what comes
Mm,
up, but also that having that agenda allows me to have more freedom and creativity in that moment.
yeah. Yeah, I think
Yeah.
like one of the coolest and scariest things about hosting is like the hyper present. You have to be so present,
Mhm. Mhm.
especially telling people like people telling their stories or kind of emotional things. So you're like listening really hard, but also kind of planning a few steps ahead.
Mhm.
It kind of reminds me of being sometimes it feels like you get into the flow state of like you're just you're doing like you are really present, but you're also like slightly planning for what is going to happen next, because
Mhm.
you want to keep the conversation moving and you don't want it to just die off. It's like, kindling a flame, like keeping the fire going. So you don't want to get too cool.
Yeah, something about what you were just saying about the structure allowing for more freedom reminded me of like improv. Like I used to do a lot of improv comedy, and a lot of times there's like a secret structure that you're using, a form, so that to the audience it might seem like it's all improvisational, but the players know that you're trying to reach certain points, and so there's a sort of like collective consciousness where you're trying to reach those points together. So you all kind of you have the structure in the back of your mind, kind of, and you maybe like subconsciously play towards that structure a bit.
Yeah, it's really cool because complete open-endedness can be paralyzing.
Yeah, and I know that for the audience it might be a little bit like, what exactly is happening here?
Well, it can be just a performance or a happening, but it's not what you
Yeah,
want to be
yeah,
for each.
yeah,
Like it can always be something, but
sure.
They
yeah,
could embrace ambiguity, though.
Yes,
yeah, you can
true,
just
true.
this is what it is, and that's it. But it's not quite what your intent was, and again, what is sad, right?
Mm,
Yeah. Yeah, structure is fundamental, I believe, even though you gotta be seamless, right? In the context, you will describe it beautifully. Like there's a structure, but it's seamless to the front, but it's a
mm,
lot happening in the process. Yeah, yeah.
mm,
Have you
Yeah,
heard
like
about this expression organically, happen organically, that feels
mm,
in the natural world, I accept it.
mm,
But in the human world, when it's organically, right? Like it can be so messy.
yeah.
mm.
Sorry.
Yeah,
So,
it's beautiful. People can kind of move together on almost subconsciously if they kind of are on the same page with a structure that maybe they're not so obviously hewing to, but then they just kind of come together. That's the best.
Yeah. For some reason, I was thinking now of like what we were talking about before. The Rosa was bringing up like the binaries and like architecture, politics, and then thinking of like resisting a structure, what that does, and then how like the word resistance then opens up this whole other possibility of structure. That then I don't know what I'm saying exactly, but that's where my mind just went into thinking about resistance as a positive.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. We have reached the hour, guys, and there's some people that started leaving, so we can just hang out for a little while people are still here with us. But thank the ones that are needing to leave. Thank you for joining, guys, and
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
Do you have any like list of these are people we want?
Yeah,
Yeah?
we've got
Who's on your list in case they were to see this by?
Kirby knows the number one.
yeah. Well, our joke is that our dream guest is Keanu Reeves, but
But then we have like a lot more like closer asks, like
yeah, yeah.
River Ramirez, like a kind of comic that's like within circles of our like maybe 6
Of
degrees.
separation,
Yeah,
kind of
not too far from us, not Keanu far. Didn't we put some dead people on the list too?
Oh
Like
yeah, we definitely
Isam,
like Frida Kahlo.
yeah,
And
Isamu
we would love
Noguchi.
to, yeah, interview do some resurrection episodes.
The round table could also be a seance.
Oh, that would be, we could do a couple, like a round table series, and yeah, have some different objects on the table each